Like the men's team, Teri Moren and the women are not shying away from high-profile matchups as they have a couple of big showdowns set for next season.
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody. You are Locked On Hoosiers, the only daily IU podcast. We are part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. Big shout out for tuning in, wherever that may be, whether listening to us or watching us over on YouTube. Appreciate you guys making us your first listen every single day. We've known a lot about the men's basketball team, their schedule for the upcoming season. The women's team, that information hadn't really gotten out. But on Thursday, Inside the Hall reported a number of opponents for the Hoosiers. Alex Bozich over there found out a good chunk of the non-conference schedule, 7 non-conference games scheduled for Indiana, and a couple of big highlights. First, Indiana will be going to the Fort Myers tip-off to play Tennessee and Princeton next season. Tennessee, someone the Hoosiers played last season. Little surprised it's not any kind of home and home series from last year. I don't know if the game they played last year was part of some showcase or challenge or something like that, but would have loved to get Tennessee in Assembly Hall this year, and perhaps they do next year after playing what will be back-to-back seasons. But IU will play them in Fort Myers. That'll be on November 23rd. They'll play Princeton November 24th. Officially, it's the Elevance Health Women's Fort Myers tip-off. One of those Thanksgiving week kind of showcases, MTEs, multi-team events, whatever you want to call it. The Hoosiers will be playing in one of those, notably not in Las Vegas after that absolute you-know-what show last season and everything that happened there. The other big game of note, though, Indiana will be playing Stanford at Stanford on November 12th. It's part of a home and home. Stanford will come to Bloomington in 2024. Both those games are going to come against teams that are going to be top 15 teams next season. I mean, that's what the Hoosiers look set to be, maybe a top 10 team this season. If you want to look at ESPN's way too early top 25 is just kind of a reference point. Tennessee's currently number 12. Indiana's number 7. Tennessee is number 12. But Rakia Jackson will be returning the big piece for them. And then Stanford is number 16. Cameron Brink is going to be a really interesting matchup for Mackenzie Holmes in that game. Those are your Tennessee and Stanford are going to be your two really big games for the Hoosiers. Another kind of fun part of the schedule, the Hoosiers are going to face Maine in Portland, Maine on November 30th at Cross Insurance Arena in Portland, Maine. Why is that notable? Mackenzie Holmes is from Maine. So the Hoosiers will be going to her kind of hometown, home area, basically. I always like when coaches do this. I know it was more commonplace maybe in other places or in previous years or things like that. But when a player stays 4 years and you give them kind of a game at their home state or as close to home as you can get, I've always been a big fan of that. Mackenzie Holmes is from Gorham, Maine. I'm not going to pretend to know where that is or in reference to Portland, but that Indiana is going to Maine, I think is noteworthy, and kudos to Teri Moren for that one. Because that'll be a fun trip, fun little note in the season. It is 23 minutes, so Gorham looks to be just outside of Portland, Maine. So a 20-minute drive instead of a multi-hour flight or whatever, however they've been watching Mackenzie's games. Rest of the schedule we know, Eastern Illinois, November 9th. That Stanford game, November 12th. Murray State, the 17th. Tennessee and Princeton and Fort Myers on the 23rd and 25th. Maine on November 30th, and Evansville on December 18th. That is what we know for the women's side. Now, on the note of Mackenzie Holmes, we were going to talk about what must go right for the Hoosiers to win the back-to-back Big Ten titles this year. We've done versions of this throughout the last week. We did football last Friday talking about bowl game. What's it going to take for the Hoosiers to make a bowl game? Monday, we did men's basketball. What's it going to take for them to win the Big Ten? We did recruiting Wednesday in the last show. Everydayers will know, obviously, the recent shows we've done. But today we're going to talk women's basketball and what it would take for them to win back-to-back titles. And I want to start with Mackenzie Holmes because this is kind of a given, so I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on it. But if IU is going to win back-to-back Big Ten titles, Mackenzie Holmes has to play like an All-American. And I think that is the top of the list. Like, she has to be healthy, playing at the level she has the last 2 seasons, and continuing to be dominant if Indiana is going to be back-to-back Big Ten champions. Certainly capable of it. She's as capable of playing as good as anybody in the country. And she did it all of last season. Ultimately kind of slid under the radar because of Caitlin Clark, I think, in the conference, but she was unbelievable. She had one game where she shot under 50%. It was the Ohio State game in the Big Ten tournament where she was injured. Every other game, she shot at least 50% and was absolutely remarkable in Big Ten play. 24 points, 7.6 rebounds, shot 68% from the field. That doesn't even feel like a real number. 68% from the field on 14 attempts per game. Obscene stuff she did last season. And that's coming off a junior season, which she was really, really good. She was injured for part of it. But keeping her on the floor, and that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later on in the show, is going to be the biggest challenge for the Hoosiers. But when she's on the floor, she needs to play like an All-American. Now, she's done that for the last couple of seasons. I'm not really concerned about her, whether or not she'll do it. It's just, if we're looking at scenarios where Indiana wins the Big Ten title, I don't know that I see a scenario where they do it and Mackenzie Holmes isn't one of the best players in the country. Like, if there's an injury or if something happens and she's not one of the best players in the country, Indiana can't win the Big Ten title. So in every scenario, if you're Dr. Strange and you're going through 16 million scenarios in their head, there might be one where Mackenzie Holmes isn't the best player and IU wins a Big Ten title, but that's about it. So that is at the top of the list for me. And it's going to be an awesome send-off for her. She'll get to go to Maine, as we've mentioned. She's going to have one final season in Bloomington, that capping off the greatest career that we'll have seen a Hoosier have. And I say that fresh off saying it about Grace Berger, but this should be a celebration of a season for Mackenzie Holmes. And hopefully, in a lot of ways, there will be crowning moments for her along the way as she continues to check off everything you could possibly do as an Indiana Hoosier. We're going to talk later in the summer, I guess into the fall, as it rapidly approaches, where she stands in the record books for a lot of things, because she's going to break lots of records this season. So we'll do that as well. But excited to see what she's going to continue to do this year. And again, if she's at an All-American level, that alone is going to give Indiana a chance. So excited to see one final incredible Mackenzie Holmes season. There's a really big hole the Hoosiers are going to have to fill, though, a Grace Berger-sized hole. And that's what we're going to talk about and what the Hoosiers will have to do this upcoming season. Before we dive into filling that hole, though, let's talk about our friends over at eBay Motors. For a championship team like the Hoosiers were last year, Big Ten championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. I mean, the Hoosiers could hardly have fit more perfectly that starting 5 last season. And it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage. Look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back, because like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, You'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. Thanks again, guys, for making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen every single day. Every day, as I mentioned, what the last week has looked like. You guys know what that has been. We're going to continue looking ahead as we go into next week, finishing up the real dog days of the summer. Once we turn the calendar to August, we're really going to dive into football, start doing some more focus on that as the season nears. But we still have plenty of basketball we can talk about. And looking at the upcoming version of the Hoosiers, Grace Berger is someone that is impossible to replace in a lot of ways. We've talked a lot about her. I'm sure you guys are very familiar with her, obviously, but her production is going to have to be replaced some way, somehow. 12.9 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, and the countless, the unquantifiable things she did for this team, I guess, are all going to be really hard to replace. The unquantifiable stuff, I can't sit here and tell you how you replace the leadership, the calming nature, all those things. Like, that's just something that your veterans are going to have to do, whether it's Mackenzie Holmes, whether it's your veterans on the perimeter, Chloe Moore McNeil, Sydney Parrish, Sarah Scalia. But there's also a lot of production that you do have to replace. 13 points per game is no small thing. And so who steps up to fill that void? Does Sydney Parrish play more on the ball this season? Is she the person that starts to take some of that role? And no one player is going to just jump 13 points or any big number like that, but does she take the bulk of that scoring load? Sarah Scalia had a pretty down season last year, was in a shooting slump for what felt like the whole season. Is she able to break out of that? Some of those same shots she had, do they start falling? And does she pick up the bulk of the scoring next season, presumably as a starter in place of Grace Berger? If I had to guess right now, your starters are going to be Scalia, Chloe Moore McNeil, Parrish, Gerzon, and Mackenzie Holmes. Does Scalia just step in and fill that void as well? Yarden Gerzon is someone that I think is going to make a big leap this season. She was incredible as a freshman. I don't really know what to expect when it comes to what a leap will be for her. She can be someone that can play on the ball more, I think. Does IU put the ball in her hands more and have her make some of those plays and be that on-ball creator that Grace Berger was? I very much could see a scenario where that happens. She's a mismatch nightmare, and the more she can begin to handle the ball and be the playmaker for this team, which I think is what her future is down the road, if she can do that in her sophomore campaign, then it's big things, big, important, big, good things for Indiana next season. Or is it just simply by committee? Does Sydney Parrish pick up a little bit, Gerzon, Scalia, and then you have Chloe Moore McNeil as well, but then you have a lot of young players that I think could step in and pick up a little bit. Lexus Bargesser, she played a fair amount last season. Her minutes are going to go up. Does she pick up some of that? You have 2 freshmen that I think are going to factor in, Lene Beaumont and Jules Lamandola, 2 very decorated high school seniors. Do they come in and immediately make an impact? I was going to say like Yarden Gerzon did last season. That is not normal for a freshman to come in to one of the best teams in the country and immediately be one of the 5 best players. You can't expect that from either Lamandola or Beaumont, but are they able to come in and be an instant impact player? I don't have an answer for this one. I don't know who replaces Grace Berger, but somebody has to in a number of different ways. I guess the answer would be by committee, because there isn't one player on this roster that's going to step up and do everything that Grace did, because that's an impossible burden. There hasn't been anybody like Grace. Nobody's going to come in and do all of that, but a little bit here, a little bit there, pick up some pieces. Everybody do a little bit. Maybe one player is more on the ball this season and their assists go up. Maybe another player is a bit more of a scorer and their points go up. Maybe somebody is a bit more of the veteran leader, gets IU set into the right spots on the floor, the right sets, runs the plays, things like that. And you piece all that together and you're able to, in the aggregate, replace Grace Berger. But that absolutely has to be something the Hoosiers have to do this season. Is there's really big shoes to fill, and players are going to have to do it this season. There's one other thing that I think is going to be really important for the Hoosiers next year, and that is their depth has to be improved. We'll talk about what that could look like and whether it's something that can realistically be done this upcoming season. We'll do all that here in one moment. So I was texting today with friend of the show, Sabrina Merchant, who I am just now realizing I never brought up the cool background we built. But I was texting friend of the show, Sabrina Merchant. We've had her on a number of times at The Athletic, covers women's basketball. I was talking to her about the schedule, and she told me she was really fascinated to see what IU's depth looks like next season. And it's a good question. Obviously, losing Grace Berger is going to change the dynamic, but Indiana didn't do hardly anything in the transfer portal. They brought in Charnice Curry-Jelks, but that's it. So what does especially kind of the backcourt depth look like? And in general, what I think Indiana needs this season is just overall improved depth. Last year, I thought Indiana had improved depth. It was tested a bit when Grace went out. But ultimately, due to struggles from Scalia and IU, I think Teri Moren at times doesn't, I don't want to say doesn't, she relies a lot on her veterans. And it helps you win Big Ten titles like IU did this season. I think it can wear players down, though, as well. And at the end of the year, IU looked a little tired. There was a lot of things wrong in that Miami game, but that was a grueling Big Ten season that they went through. And I will always remember that them winning the Big Ten title and doing it in a year when the Big Ten was unbelievable last season and the Hoosiers won the title outright. I'm always going to remember that. But I do wonder if there's a focus on the postseason versus a focus on Big Ten play. And in doing that, does IU look to improve its depth and allow growing pains? Do you play some younger players? Curry-Jelks, someone you bring in to the front court, presumably to help Mackenzie Holmes be healthy at the end of the season. She was playing 33.5 minutes per game in the conference. She's a durable player, plays a lot of big minutes, but back-to-back seasons, she's broken down a little bit. You bring in someone like Curry-Jelks who can take some of that beating, let Mackenzie's minutes go down a little bit so that come tournament time, she's ready, as well as Curry-Jelks being someone you can rely on top of Lily Meister. Backcourt, you have a number of young players that we've talked about. Lene Beaumont, Jules Amendola, Alexis Bargesser, Henna Sandvik. Do you start playing more of those players who basically didn't really factor all that much into the team last season? Alexis Bargesser played 7.2 minutes per game, and that was most of anyone outside the top six. Lily Meister played about 6 minutes, and Henna Sandvik played about 5, and she didn't even play in every game. Do you let some of those players play in more of the games, knowing that maybe it'll cost you a game along the way? Maybe you don't win the Big Ten title or win it outright. And this is an odd argument to make in a podcast where I'm focused on how do the Hoosiers win the Big Ten title. But I think long-term, having more depth will be better. Maybe this is something you do in non-conference play. In the games against Tennessee, when you go to Stanford, do you play some of these young players, let them take some growing pains then so that when you go to Iowa and Big Ten play, they're used to being in a raucous environment against a a ranked team, or when you go to Ohio State during the season, things like that. Do you allow those growing pains in non-conference play and maybe early in Big Ten play so that come the end of the Big Ten season and heading into the tournament, you have more than what realistically was only 6 players Indiana heavily relied upon last season? That worked. Like, I can't sit here and say like, oh, that IU shouldn't have done that. It worked. They won a Big Ten title, but ultimately IU played 7 players and technically 8 players in the loss to Miami. 2 of them were Lily Meister and Ariel Wisney, who were only playing because of Mackenzie Holmes' injury. Outside of that, they played 6 people in the biggest game of the season. Is that sustainable? Can you really do that for an entire tournament? And maybe you can, but it certainly feels like the better option would be to have a little bit more depth. I mean, at the same time, Iowa only played 6 people for a good chunk of its tournament run. So I'm not saying that that's the wrong answer in having only 6 people play, but I think that having younger players develop, having a bit more depth, having more potential answers or solutions to problems when you run into a Miami and nothing's working and the Hoosiers are losing big in the first half, maybe you have more players on the bench who are comfortable in that situation that you can throw out there and see if you can get a spark before you're forced into a big comeback in the second half. I'm not sure, but I think Indiana needs to improve its depth this year to win the Big Ten title, to go deep in the postseason. Ultimately, just in a much more focused view, IU lost Grace Berger and did not add anybody in the transfer portal. You had 2 freshmen, and that's it. So IU has to improve its depth somehow because you're taking some of the only depth it had in Sarah Scalia and presumably plugging her into the starting lineup. So how does IU go about adding depth to this team is going to be something really interesting to focus on. And if they're going to win a Big Ten title, I think it's going to be because some of these young players have stepped up. Any of the players that we mentioned, Curry Jelks, Beaumont, Lamandola, Bargesser, Sandvik, somebody or somebodies out of that group are going to have to step up if IU is going to win back-to-back Big Ten titles this year. Let me know what you think. Did I miss something? Is there something you guys think needs to happen for IU to win a Big Ten title? Love to hear what you guys have to say. But thanks, as always, for making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen every day. Everydayers on the show, thank you for tuning in the last week. It's been a strong set of shows for being the middle of July and nothing to talk about. So appreciate you guys tuning in as always. Follow us on Twitter if you haven't already at LO_Hoosiers. Subscribe to the podcast, leave a rating and review, all of that great stuff. As always, guys, I hope you have a terrific Friday, a terrific weekend, and most importantly, LEO.